at me. She had been told that the Earl of Ravenscroft was a man who did not receive visitors willingly, and that the great grey stallion he kept, a Connemara of unusual size, brought over from the west coast of Ireland at considerable expense, had thrown every rider who had ever attempted him, including 3 of the finest horsemen in the county of Westmoreland. She had not been told what to do with this information. Miss Vivienne Aldcroft arrived at Ravenscroft Hall on a Tuesday in late October, when the light was thin and the oaks along the drive had already given up their leaves. The carriage wheels found every rut in the lane, and the housekeeper who met her at the door, a solid and expressionless woman named Mrs. Holt, looked her over with the careful neutrality of someone who had seen many young women arrive at this house and had learned not to grow attached to any of them. "The household rises at 7, Mrs. Holt said, leading her through an entrance hall that smelled of wood smoke and old stone. "Lord Ashbourne takes breakfast alone. He does not dine with guests unless he has specifically requested their company. He has not requested yours." Vivienne followed her up a staircase and said nothing. She was 26 years old, the eldest daughter of Sir Rowland Aldcroft, whose family had once held land in 3 counties and now held debt in 4. She had not come to Ravenscroft Hall by choice precisely, but she had come willingly enough, which was a distinction she found useful to maintain. Her younger sister, Harriet, was engaged to a perfectly decent man in Yorkshire. Her brother, Arthur, was doing something optimistic with a wool merchant in Edinburgh. It had been Vivienne's task for the past 2 years to make herself of use wherever she could be placed. And Lady Philippa Ashbourne, the Earl's mother, whom Vivienne had met exactly twice at the Assembly Rooms in Bath, had written in August to say that she required a companion of good breeding and practical temperament, and that she had thought of Vivienne. She had thought of Vivienne because there was no one else she knew who was both suitable and available and unlikely to cause gossip by their presence in the house. Vivienne understood this. She was not offended by it. Understanding the mechanics of one's own usefulness was, she had found, considerably more dignified than pretending they did not exist. Her room was in the east wing, moderate in size, with a window that looked out over the stable yard. She unpacked her 2 trunks with the efficiency of long practice and stood at the window for a moment before dinner. Below her, in the fading afternoon light, a groom was leading a grey horse across the yard. Even from 2 floors up, the animal moved differently from the other horses, longer in stride, with a quality of restrained energy that made the groom holding the lead rope look slightly anxious. That, she supposed, was the horse. She met Lady Philippa at dinner in a small room off the main dining hall that was clearly used for exactly this purpose. Family meals that did not require the grandeur of the larger space. Lady Philippa was a handsome woman of perhaps 60, with the precise posture of someone who had been told all her life to stand correctly and had eventually made it a matter of principle. "You look well," Lady Philippa said, which was not quite a compliment and not quite an observation. "I trust the journey was tolerable, entirely tolerable, thank you." "Good. I find women who complain about journeys tiresome. The road exists, one travels upon it." She settled her napkin across her lap. "My son will not join us this evening. He rarely does. I would not take it personally." Vivienne did not take it personally. She had not expected to be welcomed. She had expected to be useful, and usefulness, in a household like this one, meant learning first where one was not needed, and where the spaces were that one might quietly fill. She spent the first week learning the house. Ravenscroft Hall was a particular kind of English country house, large enough to feel imposing from the drive, but worn enough inside to feel too like somewhere actual people lived. The portraits in the long gallery were dusty at their upper edges. The library had a leak in the east corner that had been addressed at some point with a bucket and a philosophical acceptance. The drawing room where Lady Philippa received the occasional caller was warm and somewhat faded, the upholstery on the settee replaced more recently than everything else, which gave it the look of a woman wearing new shoes with an old dress. She learned the names of the senior staff. She learned that Mrs. Holt was efficient and not unkind, only thorough, which sometimes looked the same. She learned that Lord Ashbourne's man, a quiet Scotsman named Peary, moved through the house with the particular invisibility of someone who had mastered the art of being exactly where he was needed and nowhere else. She did not learn much about Lord Ashbourne himself, except in outline. His name was Edmund, though she did not yet think of him by it. He was 34, keen. He had returned from a diplomatic posting in Vienna 18 months ago and had not, since returning, left the estate. His younger brother Frederick had died 2 winters past, an accident that no one said quite what kind, and the Earl had been, in the language his mother used with careful precision, not entirely himself since then. The horse, Vivienne gathered, had been Frederick's, Punan. She saw Lord Ashbourne for the first time on the 8th day of her stay, and it was not a formal introduction. She had risen early, before the household was fully awake, because she had always slept poorly in unfamiliar places, and had learned to use the early hours productively rather than lie in bed cataloguing her own wakefulness at tea. She had taken a shawl and let herself out through the side door that opened onto the kitchen garden, and had walked from there to the fence line that separated the garden from the stable yard. The grey horse was in the paddock alone, She stood at the fence and watched him for a while. He was moving in slow circles along the far edge, not agitated but not settled either, the particular restlessness of an animal with too much energy and nowhere particular to direct it. He was, she realized, genuinely beautiful, in the way that things are beautiful when they are exactly what they are supposed to be. She did not try to call to him. She only stood there, with her arms folded across the fence rail, watching. After perhaps 10 minutes, the horse stopped circling and turned to look at her. They regarded one another across the paddock. Then, unhurriedly, he walked toward her. He was very large, up close. She could see the old intelligence in his dark eyes, the way his ears moved independently as he assessed her. He stopped a few feet away and regarded her with a skepticism that she found entirely reasonable. She extended one hand slowly, palm up. He dropped his nose into her palm, blew a warm breath against her fingers, and allowed her to scratch behind his jaw. She was still there, doing exactly this, when a voice said from behind her, "Doesn't do that." She turned. A man was standing at the paddock gate, dark-eyed, dark-haired, wearing the kind of clothes that suggested he had dressed for early morning rather than for observation. He was looking at her with an expression that was not hostility exactly, but was not friendliness either. It was the expression of someone who has seen something that does not fit their existing understanding of the world, and is not yet sure what to do about it. "He seems to be doing it," she said. A silence, then something that was almost not a smile. He's thrown 11 men. I wasn't attempting to ride him." She turned back and let the horse lip at her sleeve. Eva was only looking at him. Lord Ashbourne came to stand at the fence a few feet away from her. He did not say anything for a moment. He watched the horse with a quality of attention that was not casual. The way one watches something that matters, that has always mattered, in a way that is complicated now by other things. "He was my brother's," he said eventually. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." Another silence, not uncomfortable particularly. The morning was grey and still, and the horse had wandered back toward the centre of the paddock, satisfied. "You're Lady Philippa's companion," Lord Ashbourne said. It was not a question. "Miss Aldcroft," she said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with those very dark eyes. The colour of good coffee, she thought, which was not a poetic comparison, but was the one that came to her. And then he nodded, once, as if he had decided something preliminary. Next. "He's called Cormac," he said, of the horse. "It suits him," she said. Lord Ashbourne almost smiled again and walked back toward the house. She did not see him at breakfast. She did not see him at luncheon, which was taken by herself and Lady Philippa in the morning room. Lady Philippa was pleasant in the afternoon, less pleasant by dinner, and had opinions about the state of the county roads that she shared at some length. Vivienne listened and offered what commentary seemed appropriate, and wondered, quietly, whether the man she had met at the paddock fence was the same person the household moved so carefully around, or whether he was something slightly different in the early morning, before the weight of the day had settled fully on him. She went back to the paddock on the second morning. Nick was there, and this time he walked to her immediately, without the preliminary circling, as if they had already established something between them that required no repetition. Lord Ashbourne was not there. But on the third morning, he was standing at the far end of the fence with a cup of something she suspected was coffee, watching her and the horse with an expression she could not quite read. "Does he know you now?" he asked. "He seems to have decided I'm not a threat," she said. "He's a better judge of that than most." She looked at him then, properly. He was thinner than she would have expected a man of his rank to be, and there was something around his eyes. Not sleeplessness, exactly, but the residue of it. The look of someone who had spent a long time tired and had simply grown accustomed to the state. He held his cup with both hands, as if he needed something to hold. "I imagine he misses your brother," she said, which was perhaps too direct, but directness had always been one of her few economies. Lord Ashbourne was quiet for a moment. Then, "I imagine he does." They stood in companionable silence for a while after that. It became, over the following weeks, a sort of habit. The mornings were theirs in a way that the rest of the day was not. He would find her at the fence, or she would find him already there, and they would stand with Cormac between them as a kind of excuse and talk about small things. The weather turning, the history of the house, a passage he had been reading, a letter she had received from her sister in Yorkshire. He was, she discovered, nothing like the outline she had been given of him. He was dry in his humour, in a way that sneaked up on you. He was precise in his opinions and genuinely curious about hers, which was unusual enough to be notable. He had strong views about the proper management of upland pasture and about the unreliability of continental diplomatic correspondence, and he expressed both with the same quiet certainty. He did not talk about Frederick directly, but he talked around him, The way you talk around a piece of furniture that has been removed from a room and has left a mark on the floor where it used to stand. She did not push. She had learned that grief was not something that could be addressed head-on. It was something you had to approach from an angle, like a shy animal, and wait. He came to dinner in the 4th week. Lady Philippa did not react with visible surprise, but Vivienne noticed the very slight rearrangement of her expression, something carefully controlled, something that might have been relief. The conversation at dinner was general and civil. To Vivienne. He spoke to Vivienne about the estate's north pasture, which he was considering restoring, and she told him what she knew about drainage, from the years her father had spent fruitlessly attempting to improve his own land, and he listened with his full attention, which was a quality she had not expected and found. She admitted privately, very difficult not to value. After dinner, when Lady Philippa had gone to bed, Lord Ashbourne walked with Vivienne as far as the library and stopped. "I've been thinking about the sundial in the East Garden," he said. It was not an obvious thing to say at 10 o'clock in the evening. "Oh," she said. "Frederick planted the border around it. I haven't gone into the East Garden since he died." He looked at the closed library door rather than at her. "I thought perhaps I might. Tomorrow morning, that sounds like a good idea," she said. At her then. The library lamp was behind him, and his eyes were very dark. "I thought perhaps you might walk with me." She considered him for a moment, this careful, complicated man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had not yet found a way to set it down. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." They walked in the East Garden the next morning, and the morning after, and the morning after that. The border around the sundial had gone somewhat wild, which bothered him and did not bother her, and they disagreed about this with a courtesy that felt like the beginning of something, deceptively. She learned that Frederick had been the gardener of the two of them, reckless and enthusiastic, planting things without much planning, and being rewarded anyway because the soil was good. She learned that Lord Ashbourne had stood at that sundial in the winter 2 years ago and had not been back, she said, one morning in late November. "You should talk to him." He looked at her. "I know you can't," she said, "but you could talk at him. Some people find it useful. I talked to my grandmother's empty chair for about 6 months after she died, and I will tell you it was considerably more effective than not talking at all." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, against all apparent intention, he laughed. A real laugh, sudden and genuine. The kind that arrives before a person has had the chance to guard against it. She felt something shift, quietly, somewhere in her chest. She did not examine it directly. She was practical by nature, and she had learned to be particularly practical about things that could not come to anything. Lady Philippa, however, was watching. She watched with the focused attention of a woman who had spent 60 years observing the world and had strong opinions about how it ought to be arranged. She watched her son laugh at dinner, at which he had not done for 2 years. She watched him seek out Vivienne in the library and in the East Garden and at the paddock fence. She watched Cormac, had not allowed anyone near him. Since Frederick's death, following Vivienne along the fence line, like a dog, and in early December, Lady Philippa wrote a letter to a Miss Arabella Forsyth, the daughter of a baronet in Surrey, who was accomplished and eligible and entirely suitable, and invited her to stay for a fortnight before Christmas. She told Vivienne about it over morning tea, in the particular tone she used for things that had already been decided. Miss Forsyth will be arriving on the 14th, she said. She is a very sensible girl. Good family. You will have a great deal in common. Vivienne looked at her over the rim of her cup and understood perfectly. I see, she said. Edmund needs to think about the future, Lady Philippa said. He has been. It has been good this past month, but one cannot grieve indefinitely, and one cannot, that is to say. She stopped, and for just a moment something that looked almost like discomfort crossed her face. You have been very good for this household, Miss Aldcroft. I want you to know that I recognize that, and I am thanking you for services rendered, Vivienne thought, and I am telling you that they are no longer required, she said. Of course, I understand entirely. Miss Forsyth arrived on the 14th. She was everything Lady Philippa had indicated, pleasant, composed, pretty in an undemanding way, with the kind of conversational ease that came from having been trained for exactly this purpose. She was also, Vivienne thought without malice, genuinely nice. It would have been easier if she hadn't been. Cormac refused to let her near him. This was not objectively meaningful. He had refused to let everyone near him. The fact that he had stopped refusing Vivienne was the anomaly, not his refusal of Miss Forsyth. Vivienne told herself this very firmly. She also noticed that Lord Ashbourne, at dinner on the first evening of Miss Forsyth's visit, the look of a man who had been handed something he had not asked for, and was being very careful to be polite about it. She told herself that was not meaningful either. She began, quietly, to consider the practicalities of leaving. There were other households. There was a family in Edinburgh that Mrs. Holt had mentioned, who were looking for a governess. She was better suited to companionship than teaching, but she was adaptable. She had always been adaptable. She went to the paddock on the 15th, in the early morning before the house was awake, and stood with Cormac for a long time. The frost was hard, and the air was the kind of cold that clarified things. She did not hear him approach. She rarely did. You're earlier than usual, Lord Ashbourne said. I didn't sleep well. He came to stand beside her at the fence. Not his usual position, slightly apart, beside her, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his sleeve if she had wanted to. She did not reach out and touch his sleeve. My mother has invited Miss Forsyth, he said. Yes, she said. She told me. She didn't ask me. Vivienne looked at the frost on the grass. She's trying to take care of you, she said. In the way she knows how. Yes, a pause. She's been trying to take care of me that way for 34 years. No, it has not always been the care I needed. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Cormac nosed at her sleeve and she let him. I'm going to ask you something, Lord Ashbourne said, and I should like you to hear it entirely before you respond. She turned to look at him. The morning was very still. I have been, for the past 2 years, not entirely a person, he said. I'm aware of that, Drick was. He was the best part of things, the part that was easy and warm and didn't require effort, and when he was gone, I found that I didn't know how to be in the world without him. I thought perhaps I simply wouldn't. Be in the world, I mean, not dramatically. I only thought I could stay here within these particular walls, and that would be enough. She waited. Don't think that anymore, he said. I think I want to be in the world again. I think I may have started wanting it sometime in October, at a paddock fence, and I have been attempting to be honest with myself about why. He looked at her with those dark, serious eyes. I don't want Miss Forsyth. I want the woman who stood at this fence on a cold morning and let my brother's horse take apples from her hand, and who told me to talk to an empty garden, and who makes me feel, the first time in 2 years, that I am actually present in a room. The frost caught the early light, and the whole paddock was briefly silver. That is, he said, the careful steadiness of a man who has prepared himself for a particular answer. If that is something new, Edmund, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. She had not planned to. It arrived in her mouth as if it had always been there, waiting for the right moment. She understood suddenly that the right moment was now. He was very still. Yes, she said, it is something I would very much like. Yet he let out a breath that had clearly been held for longer than the past 5 minutes. Cormac, beside them, shook his enormous head and went back to the frost on the grass. Lady Philippa received the news with a silence that lasted approximately 40 seconds, and then resolved into something that was not quite an apology, and was not quite an acknowledgement, and was, in fact, both. She told Vivienne that she had thought, and then she stopped, and her posture did not shift, but something around her eyes did. I misjudged, she said finally. Simple as that. I was afraid, and I did something foolish, and I misjudged. Vivienne said, You love him. It's understandable. I should have trusted him to know his own mind. She looked at Vivienne for a moment with a directness that was, in its way, an inheritance Edmund had clearly received. I should have trusted you as well. This house has been different this past month, lighter. Miss Forsyth departed gracefully on the 20th, with a warmth toward Vivienne that was either genuine or very well performed, and Vivienne chose to believe it was genuine because it made everyone's afternoon easier. The engagement was announced in January. The wedding was in April, when the East Garden boarder had come back with the kind of optimistic excess that Frederick would apparently have recognized as his own work. Edmund stood at the sundial the morning before the wedding, not speaking aloud. He had tried that once and found it insufficient, but standing with the particular quality of attention that is its own form of conversation, the kind that doesn't require an answer, because the answer is already understood. Vivienne found him there, as she often did. She stood beside him and did not speak either, for a while. The garden was loud with birds, and the border was rioting with early spring things, and Cormac was visible through the gate, grey and enormous, and entirely at his ease in the paddock. He would have liked you, Edmund said. I think I would have liked him, she said. He took her hand. She let him, and then she held it, in the way that you hold something you intend to keep.